Turn to 2 Timothy. Keep it open. Then we're going to be going to Titus after that. We've talked a lot about family members, and not just family members within the church family, but family members in our own family. So we got both sides of that coin. And so today we're going to talk about the family and the church family and cover the importance of grandparents. Now, if you have grandchildren, anybody got grandchildren? Yeah, if you have grandchildren, when you had grandchildren, and especially as they got to get a little bit older, you realize at that point in time, you probably should have had them first. You like skip the whole problem issue and go straight to the grandkids. It's wonderful. Listen, I'm going to be the first one to tell you, I grew up in a multi-generational church. I remember sitting, my family took, at Madison Church, my family took up, really, we had long pews, really long pews, and there would be 40 of us from the family all sitting together. Grandparents, great aunt and uncles and cousins, and I've shared this with you before, I think, that even when I was a kid, my great aunt carried in her pocketbook a big package of juicy fruit gum. How many of you remember? Okay. Yeah, and so when you're a little kid, you start getting a little bit boisterous or maybe a little fidgety in the worship service, because our family took up like 5 rows, okay? And we always sat together. But my great aunt always would just turn to us and start passing out juicy fruit gum. Yes, in the sanctuary. I get it, but she had a plan. And so even today, when I smell juicy fruit gum, I'm like 12 years old again. It just never fails. So I believe in the need for multi-generational across the board in the church. Churches that have all very young don't have foundation and experience, but all those who have nothing but foundation and experience have no life and exuberance. So you got to put both of those things together. They are very, very important. Now I want to share this with you too, because I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the generation gap does not exist. It is a false, man-made construct of people who cannot show respect. It can only exist if we create the gap and maintain the gap. I want to read something to you from my great-grandmother. She was a school teacher very on in her life and was a prolific writer, wrote letters to the editor of the Tennessean paper quite often. She was one of the most recognized writers to the Tennessean, letter to the editors. This is what she wrote. This is an article clipped from a paper from 1967. Generation gap is only a myth. To the editor, we hear a lot now about the generation gap. I do not know exactly what is meant by it. If there is one, I haven't found it. Although I am an octogenarian, I can have fun with my newest great-grandson, aged 3.5 months. He laughs, gurgles, tries to talk when I talk to him. Then there is the 2-year-old great-granddaughter with whom I played little pigs with her fingers and toes. She enjoys it and says again when I stop. Then there are the 5-year-old, that would be me, the 8 and 10-year-olds, all great-grandchildren with whom I play dolls or checkers and other children's games. There are the teenage groups, especially the high school boys and girls, I can play dominoes, Scrabble, and other games with. Also have talks and interesting discussions with. They will surprise you with their thinking and intelligence. And then there are my 50, 60, and 70-year-old friends with whom I have a lot in common and enjoy very much. We have become accustomed in recent years to coin phrases like generation gap and use them to express the great distance between the young, the middle-aged, and the old. I do not believe there is a generation gap unless you create it yourself. And I often wonder, why is it so difficult for us senior saints to be patient with the younger generation? How soon we quickly forget. And I think it's because we, as the older population, expect them to act first. But gentlemen, ladies, are we not the older, more experienced ones? Aren't we the ones that are supposed to teach them? We're the ones who shouldn't behave like middle schoolers. We're the ones that should step and close the gap. It's done by mutual respect. It was once said, somehow we have to get the older people, grandparents, widows and widowers, spinsters and bachelors, back close to children if we are to restore a sense of community, a knowledge of the past, and a sense of future for today's children. One of my greatest friends was a guy named Jim Robinson. He taught, what, 3-year-olds? Said 3-year-olds at First Baptist Church of Woodbridge, almost up until the day that he died in his late 80s. And I said, why do you like to hang around them? He said, because they don't complain like the adults. When he died, people from the age of 40 and below filled the church. There was such grand respect for that man. They had grown up loving him and respecting him because he listened to them. Now, I get it's interesting how grandparents have, grandparenting has changed over the years. I mean, let's think about it, guys. When you were young, grandparents seemed so old, and when you became one, you realized how young they really were. And the image of grandparents, I know, has changed, may be different, but the importance of grandparents has never changed. And we're going to look at 2 pieces of Scripture, particular, that speak on the influence that we can have and should have on our children, on our grandchildren. Look at 2 Timothy 1, verse 5. Just that one verse, 2 Timothy 1, verse 5. For I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your, who does it say? Which first dwelt in your grandmother. Your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well. Why was he sure that it was in Timothy as well? Because he knew Grandma Lois's faith. And he knew how powerful it was when Grandma passed it down to Eunice. And then Eunice and Grandma passed it down to Timothy and instilled it in him. They didn't force it to beat it into him. They showed him. They taught him. Lois had it, passed it to Eunice. They both passed it to Tim. Godly grandparents have both this tremendous responsibility and awe-inspiring responsibility to inspire their grandchildren to righteousness. And that's so important to understand because grandparents, I know you watch the news, probably more so. I ran into somebody this week, had lunch with him, and he was reading a paper when I went to meet him. I thought, what is that? I'm like, I haven't picked up a newspaper in I don't know how long. I know you watch the news. Satan is attacking our children left and right. He's tearing this culture down child by child. He's mounting an all-out attack on our young lives today. Just look at retailers. Look at the media. Grandparents, did you know that you were the second line of defense against the attacks of Satan on our kids? You're not the primary line. That should be mom and dad. They're the front line. But I got news for you. They need reinforcement. And you're it. In Titus 2, there's actually some helpful lessons for all of us about the role of grandparents, of those of us who are a little older in the church family and in the family. Look at Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Titus chapter 2, just matter of fact, one page over. You'll get there. But as for you, speak things which are fitting of sound doctrine. Older men are to be temperate, dignified, sensible, sound in faith, in love, in perseverance. Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husbands, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. Both our biological families and the church family needs every possible resource available And grandparents, you can be a great asset to the life of the church and the life of your family. Unfortunately, I'm going to be honest with you, just call it what it is. I have seen basically too many much senior adults who basically carry the attitude that we carried when we were in the military for a while, of I got mine, you get yours. And sit back and not want to invest. But I want to talk about your role then in enforcing these godly values. Let me speak to kids. Let me speak to grandkids. First of all, guys, it's going to have to start. Yes, you must show them respect. If you're under the age of 50, raise your hand. You must show them respect. Paul tells Titus is a young man. Paul tells Titus, pay attention to the older man and the older women in the church because they can influence the younger men and younger women and how they live. They can set a positive tone for the church and the family. I'll give you this. I know I've shared this before, but it bears sharing again. It's an older guy named Sauls, and he was in Raleigh. He was in his late 60s. And both of the services that we had were both contemporary music. Both of them. There wasn't a contemporary traditional, both contemporary music. He's in his late 60s. And I remember before the worship service one day, and I'm thinking, oh, here he comes. I can see the look on his face. Right? It's that moment that pastors cringe right before a worship service. And he's like, I can't stand this music. I was like, oh, here we go. He's like, I don't like any of it. I was like, oh, okay. But in his next breath, he said, but I look around the sanctuary and I see young adults and young families with their arms raised, eyes closed, worshiping God. And I figure it ain't about me. And I said, you're a wonderful grandfather. Because it was positive influence. Now, he wasn't shy about saying, I don't like it. But he says if it helps them and it helps young adults, then it's all good. You can set a positive tone in the church and in the family. Our home should be a place where there is an increasing respect for older people. One of the things we experienced in Honduras, and I think it's an amazing thing, especially as I get older, if there's a long line to get in the store or the pharmacy or the doctor's office or whatever, and someone over the age of 60 walks up to the back of the line, they will pass that person forward to the front of the line because it is expected that senior adults will go to the front of the line. They show that respect. So kids, grandkids, parents, we have got to show respect. And I'm not suggesting, they should be this, these dominant patriarchs, except in my house. I have a problem with it in my house. Because our grandparents, our senior adults have two very valuable commodities to contribute to us. First, wisdom that comes through experience. Wisdom about the insights in life that have nothing to do with education or IQ. It only comes through experience. Second is, most grandparents have a little more time to be of assistance. James Dobson relates this essay written by a 9-year-old girl about grandparents. Listen to what she says. A grandmother is a lady who has no children of her own. She likes other people's little girls and boys. A grandfather is a man grandmother. Even saying it, I'm thinking, probably shouldn't have done that in this day and age. Okay, he goes for walks with the boys, and they talk about fishing and stuff like that. Grandmothers don't have anything to do but be there. Grandparents, I got to tell you, your role is so important. And even if you do not have children of your own, there are children in this church family that do not get to see their grandparents much, you can be the grandparent role model for them. When we were in Germany, my grandparents were, my kids' grandparents were, 6,000 miles away. But it was awesome because in our church we had some very old people, and they were wonderful. They grandparented my child. Parents, let me talk to you parents. Do not allow your children to ridicule or make fun of their grandparents or anybody older in general. But also, parents, let your children see you respect your parents. Because I got news for you. Let me talk to you parents. The way in which you treat your parents is the way in which your children are going to treat you. And you will find yourself in a home. Think about it. Their role is important. Show them respect. Because after all, it's going to be you one day. Now, grandparents, just when you thought you were off the hook, let me tell you something. You need to be worthy of that respect. That's what Paul is talking to Titus about. Because respect goes both ways. If you want respect and love, show respect and love. The second lesson that Paul lays out in Titus teaches us that grandparents need to be worthy of respect. I know I didn't ask permission, but it just dawns on me. I'll tell you something. Here's the thing. My kids could not stand one of their grandfathers and would refuse to go to their house. We had to force them. Why? Because their grandfather was a curmudgeon, stick in the mud, griped all the time, complained about everything, and he just wasn't fun. Don't be that. Sometimes we complain that young people don't respect us when we're not living a life worthy of it. So Paul tells Titus, he says, you tell the older men, be temperate. And we need to be temperate, grandparents, in a couple of areas. Be temperate in giving advice. Give it sparingly. Be sensitive to the right time and the right thing. And this is going to hurt some of you. Be temperate with money. Do not overindulge your grandkids. You know, sometimes we give out these super lavish gifts at Christmas and birthdays. We can end up teaching our grandchildren the wrong values. Be worthy of respect, and that's setting a positive moral example. See, that the word dignified can be translated as the word respect. Now, being dignified does not mean you don't laugh and smile and play and cut up and joke. It just means you exemplify character and integrity and love. He says, be sensible. That's having discernment and discretion and judgment. And that just comes from spending all those years with Jesus. Control the temptation to meddle. Control your own sinful tendencies. Be an example and demonstrate a life of sound judgment and spiritual character. I remember when I tried to embody all this stuff years ago. So when my daughter got married and she started having kids, I said, baby, I will never freely give you advice unsolicited. And she smiled. I know she was happy about that. She's like, good, Dad's not going to tell me what to do now. I said, but if you ever ask for my advice, be ready for what you're going to hear. That's also being temperate, grandparents. Not meddling. Being respectful that they are the parents, not you. Paul gives this trilogy of words to describe how we are as grandparents to be healthy and whole. He said, be sound in faith, sound in love, and sound in endurance. Grandparents, continue to trust God. Show your children and grandchildren that you have no doubt in God or His words. I promise you, there will be some things in this life and in this world that will culturally change, and you're not going to like it. And you're going to have to adjust to trends like music or the pace of life or how things are done, but you can still stand firm on biblical principle. Be flexible in the things that don't matter. Be firm in the things that are eternal. And make sure you wrap all of that sound doctrine in sound love. Because let me tell you something, when it comes to our grandkids, and I'm going to say this for the family and the church family, we should be the source for them of Jesus' unconditional love. Those of us with the whiter hair should be showing unconditional love. And make sure you demonstrate it to each other. Your grandchildren need to see you as an example of lasting, godly marriages. They need to see that after being married 40, 50, 60, anybody got 70 years on us? 70 years? That even after all that time, they need to see that love hasn't died. Because few things can undermine the stability of an extended family more than grandma and grandpa having marriage problems after 40 years. Let your grandkids see you hold hands. Let your grandkids see you kiss goodbye when one of you leaves the house. But also let them know that your marriage is founded on Jesus Christ. And because of that, it has become a wonderful thing. Because here's what we want them to have. We want them one day, and by the way, I have heard it at least 2 funerals in the past 12 months. Beautiful things, beautiful things. Couple married for years and years, decades and decades and decades, and I have heard it from their grandkids, and they go, you know what? I want my marriage to last as long as my grandparents. And I've heard them say things like, I want my marriage to be just like my grandparents. I wonder where they got that from. Do you think mom and dad told them that? You think granny and granddaddy told them that? They saw it. They witnessed it. And that means we have to persevere. Listen, I know, I get it. I get it. The older I get, the further away I have to hold the book. Sometimes getting off your knees is not as easy as it used to be. And you may not be able to do some things that you did when you were younger. And remember, your grandchildren, they're never going to see the things that you did in the past. But they need to see you involved in the present. Somehow, some way. They need to see you in the church family, serving actively on a ministry team. That's like I said, my friend Jim Robinson was mid-80s when he passed away. I think he honestly quit teaching 3-year-olds when he was like 81. That man served. I've got another friend of mine who's in his late 90s, and he still invests in younger lives in the church. And I used to jokingly tell him, Walter, when I grow up, I want to be Walter. He was just an amazing man. I want to be him. Now, then, Paul does talk to the women. What's interesting in 3, he says, sisters, just like all the stuff I just said, now here's some extra things. Be holy. Sisters, be different than the world. And that's character. He also says, resist being a gossip. I mean, there are country songs about it. As long as old men talk about the weather, and old women talk about old men. It was said, big people talk about ideas, average people talk about events, but little people talk about others. Don't become bitter as you grow older, and in so doing, become slanderous and critical of other people. Be a living example of what Ephesians 4:29 says. Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for the building others up. Paul says old women are to teach what is good, to take the initiative to train the younger women. Sisters, my older sisters, listen to me. Please do not complain about these young women. Teach them. Show them. I have a friend of mine, Natalie Holliday. Her husband was our youth pastor for years in Woodbridge. And when they went to camp, she took a muumuu house dress. Stay with me. She told the girls, if you wear anything inappropriate, they said, what's inappropriate? She said, anything that I deem inappropriate, you will wear a muumuu the rest of the day. They didn't believe her. I saw pictures of girls wearing muumuus. They only did it one time. She took her role seriously as an older woman, even though at the time she was in her 30s, that she had a responsibility to teach younger women what modesty was and what godly women do. Paul says the purpose of all of this, older men and women, to do these things is it so no one will malign the Word of God. If a younger person, if their faith is questioned, can they point to your life as a defense? Says, well, Jesus isn't real. Really? Explain my grandma. Well, God isn't real. Really? Explain my daddy or my granddaddy. When you can explain their behavior away, then I might follow you. But you can't. Because they know God is real. This role in the body of Christ and in our families is so important. It needs to be worthy of respect, and it needs to be respected. Just because you're old on the outside does not mean you have to be old on the inside. Talked to a friend of mine this week. She turned 63. And I was like, oh, wow. Jill, I thought you were like 56. She laughed. She says, well, I may be 62, but I act like I'm 40. Old is an age, not an attitude. Let me say that again. Old is an age, not an attitude. Don't be the church curmudgeon. Don't be the difficult, cantankerous person. I had two grandfathers, Papa and Granddaddy. I loved being around them. They weren't crotchety old men. They weren't curmudgeons at home or in church. And because of that, I wanted to be around them all the time. I would beg my mom and daddy, please let me go. Please. They'd come pick me up after a week with my grandparents. I was like, no! I'd fight screaming all the way to the car. No, I don't want to go. I'm sure my grandparents are going, please take him. Please take him. I couldn't see it, so it didn't matter. But I didn't want to go. I wanted to listen to them. I'm going to tell you something. They taught me a lot. My one grandfather taught me that the only thing in the middle of the road is a lion and a dead skunk. Think about it. Nobody listens to a sourpuss. You might say, well, I'm not that way with my grandkids, but trust me, just like they're watching their parents, they are watching you. And not just at home. They're watching you in every walk of life. You say, well, I'm not that way with them at home. Yeah, but you were really rude to that waitress, weren't you? If you're that grumpy old man, that mean old lady, people see that. And they're not going to want to listen to you. They don't want to be around you. It undermines your credibility with your grandchildren. Do not be the grandparent that undermines the parent. Let me say in love, grandparents, let me say in love what your children would like to say to some of you. Stop interfering. It got real quiet. Do not drop the subtle passive-aggressive hints. Don't make critical comments, because if you don't, when your child does come ask for counsel, you can give it and they will accept it. When asked, give your advice in love and then be quiet. There was a preacher in Kentucky. It was very clear that he loved his mother, who was in her 70s, but he says, she still treats me like a child. He says, she's a dictator. The only difference between her and Adolf Hitler is she's a Christian. But still a dictator and bossy. He tells her one day, taking her home from a church service, and he stopped at an ice cream store. And as soon as he stopped, she said, Wayne, since when do we buy ice cream on the Lord's Day? Wayne said, we don't, Mother, and just took her home. He said after he dropped her off, he went back to the ice cream store. He says, he actually went on to say, now you may think that's hypocritical, but God will forgive me. She won't. Let me make sure you heard that. He said, you may think it's hypocritical, but God will forgive me. She won't. Grandparents, make every effort you can to support those parents. And it goes beyond the negative of interfering. It's about being positive and as supportive as often as you can. It's saying to your grandkids, even the little kids at church, now look, guys, listen. That's what Mommy and Daddy said is best, and that's what we're going to do. I've heard too many grandparents say, well, that's okay, you're with me this weekend. Mom, Dad, their bedtime's at 8:30. As soon as the car's out the driveway. Let's stay up and eat ice cream till 11. This is going to be fun. No, the positive part is to say, Mom and Dad think this is best, and God put Mom and Dad in charge, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to obey them. We're going to obey Mom and Dad. Learn the boundaries of your grandkids. Don't say, hey, if you come to my house, we can go to the movies. You can do that so long as the parents haven't said no. Don't use manipulation like, if you come with me, I'll go buy that toy for you. And here's a tough one, really tough. I admit this, very, very tough, especially in this day and age. Make every effort to be supportive if the parents are divorced. You may be bitter against your daughter-in-law. You may be bitter against your son-in-law, but do not belittle and criticize them to your grandchildren. That's their parents you're talking about. That's the mama. That's their daddy you're talking about. Grandparents are often the unnoticed victims of divorce. I get that, because their relationship with the grandchild becomes less significant, and they're hurt because they lose the close touch. But grandma, grandpa, set a spiritual standard and make every effort to not lash out. And listen to your grandchildren. Your advice is great, but sometimes we can bore our grandkids to death. Caleb, do not say a word. We spend more time talking about the good old days than what we think about what they're doing in their days. You know, we say things, when I was your age, I used to walk to school 2 foot of snow, uphill both ways. See, even she's upset by it. Give your grandkids the opportunity to talk. My great-grandmother said, if you will listen to them, you will find out just how intelligent they are and how amazing they are. And you can laugh with them. Let them see some joy in your life. Do not walk around like you've been sucking on persimmons. My grandfather Brown was a godly man, a hard worker. He built a huge business. Straight-laced man. But he would do things like at Christmas, we would all have these family gatherings. There'd be like 200-300 of us in the room. and we're unwrapping gifts, and he would take one of the bows and put on top of his head. And it would stay there for hours. He looked so silly. I'm almost 60, and I still remember that. Don't care about his business. Don't. I didn't get any of it anyway. But what I got mattered. I saw this strong, godly man who could be silly and be silly with his grandkids. Don't be afraid to be silly. Don't be afraid to laugh with them. But most importantly, share your faith with them. Proverbs 13:22 reads, "A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children." Let me say that again. Now watch. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. I'm going to be real honest with you. My grandfather's humongous business, I got zero. But you know what I got? Memories. You know what I got? I got his Bible that you can still hold in your hand today and feel the imprint of his hand. It was so worn. He left me an inheritance that no one can take away. It's not about money. So when you have your grandkids, talk about the Lord when you're with them. Bring them to church with you. And let them see you live it. The bottom line, guys, is this. Grandparents, you're either going to leave a dent or a fingerprint. A dent is damage. A fingerprint is an impression. You're either going to leave a dent or a fingerprint. Paul told Timothy, I know of your grandmother's great faith. Grandparents, senior adults, may it be said of our grandchildren, as it was in Timothy, I know your faith because I know your grandmother's faith was in here first, and in your grandfather. I believe in the absolute necessity of multi-generational church. I believe it happens when two things happen. Because of a God we cannot see that we love, that we ought to love one another, and that includes respecting each other, both sides.